Hi everybody, Mrs. Giroux here, day 49. We're starting our unit on contrast. This is our Pinterest page, has some great videos on it, I'll point out later, and some good examples on what we're going to be doing. Today, let me focus in here, we are discovering how the art principle contrast may be used to bring a work of art to life, create a mood, or even delight the viewer's eye. And you can see here that I use two contrasting colors, complementary colors, red and green. Okay. Next, we talked about what the project is going to look like, what it's going to be. It's going to be inspired by op artists Bridget Riley and Victor Vasserly. We're going to create a work of art which emphasizes the principle of contrast, high contrast. We're going to participate in a class collaborative wall hanging mural type of design, and we're going to include some printmaking techniques. I'm also going to teach you about the medium art acrylic paint and the properties of acrylic paint. You're going to apply your knowledge of the art principle contrast to whatever we're doing this week. Okay. Then we had a discussion on what is contrast and some key words that you're always going to want to listen out for or read are differences and opposites. And when you see those words, ding, 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 that's going to give you a clue. The answer may be contrast, or they all have similar definitions in art. So what you're going to look at over here are some opposites or contrasts in terms of art that the classes came up with. I started them off by doing abstract and realistic. First period gave me light and dark, rough and smooth, warm and cool. Second period, bright and dull, close up and far away, thick lines and thin lines. The next class gave me 2D shapes and 3D forms. Very good. And then we have symmetrical and asymmetrical, and lastly sharp and blurry, and colorful and black and white. Those all contrast with each other. Okay. We talked about a book that most of you are familiar with, or at least the illustrator, Richard Scarry, and he's got the book Big and Little, talking about opposites, so we read a little bit of that in class. Looked over at our poster, right, all about contrast, contrasting colors, that it's a principle of design. Reviewed what principles meant. Okay, we had a class discussion. I'm walking over here. And we talked about the similarities and differences between these two paintings. Let's see if I can get the glare off. The one on the left is William H. Johnson, and the one on the right, familiar one, is Paul Cézanne, called Apples and Oranges, and we compared and contrast these. First, we listed all of the similarities, the things that were very similar or alike. Obviously, the first one is the subject matter, which is fruit. We had people note that the fruit was in a bowl on both of them. Someone else mentioned that they're both on a table. They both have a white tablecloth. Lots of similarities. And that the type of artwork was a still life. Had to be reminded of that. These are not portraits. They are not landscapes. These are examples of still life. And then we started looking at contrast. What makes these two different? We talked about the style, the number of objects. In other words, the weight, the visual weight of the object is different in each of the pictures. We talked about colors. Some of the colors are very similar and some are contrasting. One person brought up that he felt that this was a much more intense painting, used the color intensity, than this one. This one has value, someone says, whereas the other one is not shaded quite as much of this. This you can even see in the folds of the fabric here. That one is contrasting with this one where it looks very flat. So kind of more of a two-dimensional looking type of painting. And this one has a little bit more depth to it. We even talked about the backgrounds of both of these pictures. Okay, so again, we're on contrast. Then we had a great discussion on contrast in the movies and how do movie makers create contrast and why do they create contrast. So we talked about Halloween movies and scary movies, and that the music can indicate that something awful is going to happen. So it might be going along very sing-song, very, light, airy music, and then all of a sudden you hear, the shark music coming in. You know something is about to happen. Well, the movie maker, the sound person, has created contrast. Also, dark and light, going down a dark hallway and coming out into the light, or vice versa. Lots of good examples were given for movies. People really got into that discussion. We talked about how boring life would be if every day were exactly the same, or basically the same routine every single day. And everyone agreed that that would be boring. And we brought up other examples of, what if the weather were all the same? What if your teacher was the same for every single class? And then they reminded me, well, that is how most elementary schools are still. Okay. So we talked about that and how contrast in life brings about interest, curiosity. Okay. We talked about natural contrasting with human-made objects. So think about things that are made, such as buildings, and that they're surrounded by natural things, such as grass and trees and so forth. And we talked about the contrast that these can actually create and the impact that that would have. We went back to our project on surrealism, and we talked about how surrealists contrasted realistic objects, with placing them in unrealistic situations or places. Had a different discussion on that. Okay, then we took back a look at our Pinterest page. Okay, and we went down here to this video. I think it's a rather silly video, but everybody watched it and got the point of compare and contrast. And they also show you a Venn diagram, which is handy. Always good to use that. And then we went down here. Here's another 2 paintings to compare and contrast. Both musicians. One is obviously one you already know, Pablo Picasso. And the other one is by a famous African-American artist, Romare Bearden. So we'll be talking about those again. Your definition for contrast, look at that. And here it is. And then this is one of the movies that we watched. Short visual on Victor Vasarely. And then if you go to our art history page, you will see 2.27 is on Victor Vasarely. Maybe a little bit on Bridget Riley as well. Those are the 2 you need to know. So there are 3 videos actually on this page, and you can just watch one of them if you want to, or you might be interested in how it's made. That's a good example right there. And then the last one is another one with music and some of his work. You will be having a test on Friday, and your test number 1 is going to include all of the elements and principles of design that we've covered so far, the art history that we've covered. So if you have not turned in your PowerPoint lesson, definitely go ahead and do that. And you can also look up the rest of the art history assignments on your eClass page. So definitely need to go, start on those. If you have not started, you need to get started on those. 2.1 is Leonardo da Vinci, Mona Lisa. 2.2 is The Last Supper, and so on and so forth. And then you'll get to whichever assignment was yours. So all of those will be on the test, and I will also be grading the test. We'll highlight the correct answer, so you'll be able to use these as a study guide for your final exam, and I've always found that that's been very, very helpful. Please make sure you come this week. Your project will take a little bit longer, where it's going to be on a 18 by 18 square piece of white paper. We're going to be working with markers and colored pencils and adding the value to the pictures. So here are examples of what we're going to be doing, small examples. Okay, so zoom in there. You have to have at least one sphere. If you're unsure of how to draw a sphere, okay, here's a handout I'm going to have for everybody. Starts off with a plain circle, divided into fourths, and so forth. Okay, that'll give you an idea. So again, it's going to be black and white, and it's going to contrast with color. And the color is going to be using value, a skill we've already learned, blending of the colors. Okay, and I look forward to seeing you. I think that's it for today. Oh, one last thing. We worked on the murals, the wall hanging murals, and we learned about acrylic paint and the properties, and we're wearing an apron, we're washing out our brushes and storing them bristles up. We're not getting the paint on our clothing, it does not come out. And all we did was we used some gesso, and we painted most of the taped off areas with white gesso just to seal the canvas, so it's going to be a little bit easier, smoother, and will make your colors brighter when we paint on these. And then we'll go back over to the numbers that we cut out and glued to a popsicle stick, and we glued them backwards so that when we print them on our canvases over here, that they will be right side up. Okay, and that's the gesso that we used. It's acrylic base, water based. All right, now that is it.